Hi friends, welcome back to another video. I'm very excited to be sharing this video on how I designed our unit study for this year for US history for the entire year that I'm using with my second grader and my kindergartner. Now, this is how I designed it, okay? I'm not saying that this is how you should do it necessarily. Whenever I make a video like this, I want to be perfectly clear that this is not how everyone should make a unit study, for example, for this video. Okay, I'm not saying this is how you need to do it. This is how I did it. So take what works for you, change what doesn't, and disregard the rest. Okay? That's why I make videos like this, is just to share ideas, get the brain going, and hopefully it helps you, and I hope that this one does. So, let's get started. So the very first thing that I did was just decide which time periods I was going to be covering. So with this being US history, I decided to start at the beginning and work our way through the 1800s. That's where I wanted to end. I didn't want to go into the 1900s or anything having to do with modern day. I'm doing this with like I said, my kindergartner and my second grader, so we're keeping things easy. We want to learn names, we want to learn places, we want to learn the big events. I'm not worried too much about the details this year. There'll be plenty of times that we go through US history where we cover topics in greater detail. So that was like step 0.5. Okay, decide exactly how much of US history we were going to do. The next thing I did was brain dump the big events through US history that I could recall. Okay? Now, if for me, I knew that if I got out an encyclopedia and I started researching already in the beginning, that I was going to get stuck, because I was going to start worrying about all the different things that I should be covering, or, oh, we can't forget that. And I would start creating problems and trying to solve them before I've even actually taken my first step. So I, just brain dumped what I could recall, and then later on I knew that I would come back and edit, change out the units, rename them, separate things out. So I started with 5 units. This is what I could remember. Okay, I have not taken a history course. I haven't taught history to my kids yet. This is our first year doing a history course. So I had not thought really about history since high school. I did not have to take history in college. My 3 semesters of music history, my knowledge of Gregorian chant does not come into play here at all. So here's what we started with. Vikings, colonial times, Revolutionary War, Lewis and Clark, and the Civil War. We started with that, okay? That was step 1. Just brain dump the big events that I could remember on my own. The next step is starting to order the books. Doing some research and ordering books. Now, this can be kind of daunting, so here's what I did, okay? So I bought them from either Barnes & Noble or Amazon. That's the first thing, okay? The other thing is I wanted to stick with mostly picture books and some easier, shorter chapter books for read-alouds. My other kind of rule for myself was, when ordering these books, is I wanted to make sure that they were quality. Of course, I want to make sure they're quality books, but also quality in the fact that my kids will want to reread them, that I can use them again when we cycle through history, whether that means that my kindergartner can read them on her own when we cycle through this again, that I can use these again with my toddler. I want to make sure that any books that I bought were not just going to be a one-time read for this year only. So that's kind of like my rule for myself, is these have to be used more than once. Okay, as far as finding the books. So I have actually, some of you might laugh, but I keep tons of homeschool wish lists in my Amazon account. So I'll have like homeschool ancients, homeschool Middle Ages, homeschool US history, homeschool world history, homeschool read-alouds, homeschool kids readers. And when I see books either in a video that a mom is talking about, or they come across my feed somewhere and I think they look great, I will go ahead and save them. Even if they don't necessarily look great, I will save them. And then when I need to look at some books for US history, for example, this year, I went into my list and I was able to kind of look through that. Now, a lot of the books that I had on the list were read alouds, so I still had to do quite a bit of research. And a lot of the books actually were older read alouds. I'm talking like at least late elementary school to middle school, where the books were longer. I knew they had smaller words, or the topic was going to be too much for my kids. One of the books, like Johnny Tremaine, I know is going to be a great read aloud, but I also think that might be better for next time we go through US history. So I was trying to stick with easier books, shorter books. I didn't want to go into any deep details with the read alouds. Okay, and then, let's see. When it comes to finding the books themselves, here's what I did with my research, okay? Rainbow Resource, if you've never heard of that website, you should check it out. It is a great homeschool curriculum website. I love their history section in particular because you can go into a specific topic like US history, and then it divides US history into, all the different time periods. And you can go into like the Revolutionary War, and it'll break it down even more into nonfiction resources, read aloud, like historical fiction, and then it'll say biographies, and then games and activities and maps, and it'll have all, so you can really break it down as to what exactly you're looking for. So that is a great place to look. I also look at those big literature-based homeschool curriculums, like Bookshark, like Sunlight, Beautiful Feet. I know there are others, but like those are a good place to start. You go into whatever unit of history you're studying, and you can find some great books, at least to get the gears going. And then you can plug those books into Amazon or something and find, you may also like, and then you get into even more books on that topic. Okay, so that's what I did. And then my next step was that I wanted to have a series or something that sort of connected a bunch of the units, and I found one. It's the Betsy Maestro series that we've been using. It doesn't go all the way through US history, so it stops like kind of right after the Revolutionary War. So the second half of the year for us, I do have to use like an encyclopedia to kind of fill in the spaces between the units. So that was like my first step was I was trying to find like some sort of storybook or a series that would kind of take us through everything, and then buy books on a specific person or a topic or a place or an event, and picture books that were nonfiction like that. And then lastly was the read alouds. Okay, so that was like my thought process with that. So the next step, the books come in and we organize them. Okay, I actually sat on the couch and I had piles all around me for the 5 units that I had started with. And I took those books and I wrote them down, I typed them up. Under my Vikings unit, I had, if there was like a main story book. So for that was Discovery of the Americas. And then any of my nonfiction books would go next. And then lastly, I would write the read aloud. So, and I would actually write read aloud and then the title of the book. And then after that, I would either write the place or the year that it took place. So one of the books, one of the read alouds we had was about Jamestown. So I put in parentheses, Jamestown. And I mostly did this because, especially when it came to the books during the colonial period, the colonial period actually covers like quite a bit and technically kind of goes through the Revolutionary War, right? So I wanted to write the years that they took place so that I could read them in order. You don't have to do that. That's just what I did because I wanted to make sure they were read in order. So that's what I did with the read alouds. This is where now I started to do my research. I did get a US history for kids encyclopedia, and I started flipping through and noticing where I missed things. Or, I knew my Colonial unit was too long. I was going to have to split that up. So this is where I started sort of editing the units and also ordering any books that I missed, any topics that I missed, or if I totally missed, like a read aloud or something. That's what I started doing. That was like the next step. It's the revision step. So going back and filling in those blanks and ordering any books that I missed. And so when those books came in, that was kind of it. The second round of books was kind of it for me. I did notice that I still had a few blanks, and what I ended up doing for that is just, like, for example, I couldn't find any books that I wanted to buy on like Daniel Boone. So I put in the unit that he was going to be studied, I put Daniel Boone and then in all caps, library. And I know that when we get to that unit, I have to go and put some books on hold from the library for Daniel Boone. So that's sort of what I did after that. So we went from 5 units, and after all this editing and getting more books, we expanded out a little bit. So we went from 5 units to the following. This is where we ended up. Vikings and Explorers, then Colonial Times, focusing mostly on the early settlements, then Native Americans in the French and Indian War, then the Revolutionary War, then the Constitution, then Western Expansion, which is going to be like Lewis and Clark, Daniel Boone, Davy Crockett. That's what's in that unit. And then the War of 1812, then the Civil War, Underground Railroad, and Reconstruction. And then the last unit is like Western Expansion 2.0, railroads, homesteading, that type of westward expansion. So, see, we edited. We added in the things that I missed the first time around. I wasn't worried about it. That's just what I needed to do, because otherwise I would have just gotten stuck worrying about all the research the first time around. So now that I have established all of the units and gotten the books, now the next step was to figure out exactly how long each of these units were going to take. How was I going to schedule them? My thought process behind that. So there was a couple things that went into play here. Once I had my list on my computer, I had all the books written out. Some of the units have way more books than the others. So I knew that some of those were going to be the longer units, and some of the units, it's not necessarily that they had less books, but that the time period itself was shorter. So those are going to be some of my shorter units. And then I had actually 2 like mini units. So my Constitution unit, I decided to pull out, have it be separate. That's just going to be 1 week. And I actually wrote next to, Constitution, I wrote 1 week. And then the other one that was going to be 1 week, because it really doesn't fit with the Civil War or westward expansion, was the War of 1812. That's just going to be a 1 week unit. So I put next to War of 1812, 1 week. So I started with those. I said, okay, those are going to be my little mini units. Now let's look at the rest. So the first thing I did was decide that the Revolutionary War and the Civil War were going to be the units that took the longest. And although I didn't really have like a number of weeks in mind, I just kind of thought it's probably going to be like 6 weeks. 6 or 7 weeks, a month and a half, something like that. So I put 6 weeks next to the Revolutionary War and the Civil War units. Now, this hopefully makes sense to you. What I did was start at the beginning of the year and the end of the year and kind of worked backwards and met in the middle. So my first thing that I did was look at the beginning of the year, the Vikings and Explorers unit. Now, I know generally when we're going to take weeks off. I know we're going to take one off in the middle of August. I know we sometimes take a half a week to a week off in September. Again, like another half week in October, so I know when all of our breaks generally are, where I know where we're going to stop. So I said, okay, well, we're going to start sometime in July. And I know we're going to take our first break middle of August. So that's like 4 or 5 weeks right there. I should be able to do the Vikings unit in that time. So I said, okay. Next to Vikings unit, I wrote July and August. That's it. I didn't really want to plan like 4 weeks, 5 weeks. Now that one in particular, because I wanted to get it done before the break, like technically, yeah, I could have wrote 4 or 5 weeks. But the other ones, I just sort of said, well, sometime in October. So the next unit after Vikings and Explorers was Colonial Times, early settlements. So that's going to start in August. And I said, okay, September, we might have a break in there. I'll probably finish at the beginning of October. So I just wrote next to Colonial Times, August/September/October. Okay? I wasn't worried about having like an exact date, but sometime in October, that unit's going to get done. Then I started at the end. Okay? I didn't want to get too ahead of myself going forward, so I started at the end. And I just said for Westward Expansion 2.0 that was going to be 2 weeks. I just wanted kind of like a wrap-up unit, and actually that unit might even be a throwaway unit because I've never done this before. I wanted to make sure that like if we got really behind, that I could just have a unit or something that I could really shorten up or just take out completely. So that's like a throwaway unit in case we don't get to it. I hope we do. And so far we're keeping on track, but I have to plan just in case. So the Westward Expansion 2.0, possibly a throwaway unit, but I just said 2 weeks. And I know we usually end at the end of May, and maybe it like sprinkles a couple days into June, just depending on how the months line up, So I just put May next to that one. Now, before that unit is the Civil War Underground Railroad Reconstruction Unit. That's going to be a long unit. So I said, okay, so we got like 2 or 3 weeks in May, and then we're going to have April. I usually take, whenever Easter hits, I take Holy Week off. So this unit's going to be, okay, that's already like 6 weeks, and I'm going, okay, there's going to be a break in here somewhere, and then like probably need to stretch that into March then. So this unit is going to start in March. And so I wrote March, April, May next to the Civil War unit. And so I just kept going back, kept going until I met in the middle, and it worked out very nicely. So before the Civil War unit, we're going to have a week on the War of 1812, and that one's going to be in March. So I put March. And then before that is the Westward Expansion, Lewis and Clark stuff. So that one I put February. That's probably just going to be all of February. And then if we go back to the beginning, after colonial times, we have Native Americans and French and Indian War. That's going to be October, November. It's going to stretch over. And then after that is the Revolutionary War. That one's going to go November, December, possibly dip into January. And then I'll have a week on the Constitution also in January. So that's kind of how I did it. I don't have like exact dates. And, I didn't want to get like totally locked into this one has to be 4 weeks, this one has to be 5 weeks. No. That's too much. But just knowing like, okay, sometime in October, this one needs to be done. That one needs to be done, whenever. So that's what I did because I wanted to keep it a little loose, a little flexible in case, we read more or less than what we thought we were going to do. Okay, so it's sort of planned out. The next, final step was sort of deciding what else we might be doing with the units. So for me, my kids are young. It's not like they're writing papers or anything. So I decided that we would just do coloring pages and a craft for each unit. So the coloring pages, I found 2 free coloring page websites. And basically right before we start a unit, like the week before, I go through the books and sort of decide, okay, these are the people we're going to talk about, these are the places, even if it's just like generic, like a picture of the Mayflower or whatever, it doesn't, or like pilgrims working to build a house or something, I don't know. It doesn't have to necessarily be about something or someone specific, but I will just print out some of those pages, and most of the time when we read, we also will do a coloring page afterward where we talk and discuss what we've read. So that was kind of my thought. We'll color, we'll talk. That's really all we need to be doing, just to make sure that they understand what we've read. And then I just thought it would be fun to do a craft with every unit. And again, that's one of those things that I just decide right before we start the unit, or I pick like 2 or 3 things and let my kids decide. And I'm just looking on like Pinterest for things like that. So that's what we're doing. So that is how I designed, thought about all the things having to do with our U.S. history unit. And I have to say, we have completed 2 units so far, and we are really, really enjoying it. I love the laid back feel. We're diving into the topics that we want to dive deeper into. My kids are enjoying it. And I have to say, we have already decided that we will continue with this unit study process for the next 4 years through our first full cycle of history. I thought I was going to do something else next year, but we really like how this is going, and I can already tell you that I'm not going to change my mind by the end of the year. We will be continuing with these unit studies at least through like the elementary years for my kids. So that's the plan. Now I am making videos. I've already made one. And I'm going to make more throughout the year after I finish each unit, kind of do a book review, what else we did, the projects, things like that. So if you're not already subscribed, make sure you subscribe so that you don't miss any of those videos. If you want to start creating your book lists, I highly suggest doing that. It's really nice. You don't have to think about it later. So I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Please give it a thumbs up if this was helpful to you. If you want to see my process, I don't know, live or something, but like as I'm doing it for next year, I can, I don't know, maybe try to do that as well, like I said, because we are going to do this unit study next year as well with ancients. So please subscribe if you're new, give this video a thumbs up, and I will see you guys all in the next video real soon. Bye.